So I wanted to try something a little different today. I've tried to write things in the past where I teach scripting, and it hasn't really worked out. So what I want to do today is try and come up with a video guide on how to script in Multi-Theft Auto. So let's get started. The first thing you need to do is download Multi-Theft Auto itself. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Now, when you're going through this installation process, the most important thing you're going to need to do is install the server along with the client if you didn't do that when you've previously installed it, Multi-Theft Auto. Okay, so now that we have it downloaded, we're going to go ahead and open this installer. Agree to your terms and conditions. And this is going to be the most important step. Make sure that you have client and server selected in this install. And then go ahead and find where you want to install Multi-Theft Auto. It'll ask you where your Grand Theft Auto is. Mine is in the D drive, but yours could be somewhere else depending on how you got Grand Theft Auto. And you're going to go ahead and install that. Now I'm going to cancel here because I already have Multi-Theft Auto installed, but once you finish that, your download should be available in C program files, Multi-Theft Auto 1.5. So what you're going to need to do is go in here and you'll see a server directory here. This server directory is going to have a whole bunch of files inside of it, and that is what we need in order to create our Multi-Theft Auto server. All of your code is going to go inside of this resources directory. So let's go ahead and copy this server to another location on our computer that is not inside of MTA. The reason why you would do this is because this server is actually what MTA uses when you're in the MTA menu and you either click that host server button or the map editor button. So you don't really want to mess around with that too much and break your ability to have a map editor. So we're just going to go ahead and copy this guy. And what I like to do is I like to create a code directory right in my C drive and paste in whatever I'm working on right there. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Once we have that there, let's go ahead and try and start our MTA server. The initial startup usually takes a little bit longer because it kind of expands and creates some default files that you'll need moving forward. It should say should give us some indication when it's ready. Okay, so our server is ready to go now. We can see that you see this type help for a list of commands. That pretty much means that you're ready to start using your server. So let's just go ahead and, if I could spell, we'll open MTA San Andreas. Cool, so let's go to the server browser and we'll click on localhost. And yeah, we have a server. So we are ready to roll. Now, as I said, it starts with a whole bunch of default resources to give you your map editor and things like that. So we'll go ahead and probably remove those and write our own in the next part of this. Okay, so let's go ahead and disconnect out of our server and let's turn it off. So you can turn it off by hitting Control-C and it'll stop resources and turn off safely. This is the best way to turn off your server rather than clicking X because it will let the server know that it needs to deconstruct everything, save anything to the database once we have one, and just kind of do its cleanup tasks. So now that our server's off, let's go to Mods Deathmatch Resources. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to delete everything. So we are starting from a completely fresh server and we're going to build up everything that we need from scratch. So the first thing that we're going to need is a players resource. You can call it whatever you like really, but players is basically how are we going to handle authentication and getting people into our server to play. We're going to start out pretty basic, but it's a decent starting point. So we've created a players directory, and the first thing that we're going to need to do here is create what is called the meta.xml file. Now, a meta.xml file is an XML file that the server will read. So it's going to go into resources, look at all of your folders, open each one of them, and read the meta.xml to understand what's going on in this resource, what it's expected to load and not load. So this is kind of the starting point of any resource. So now that we have this file here, the first thing we're going to need is something to open it with. On the free side, you have Visual Studio Code, which I highly recommend. If you would like to spend some money, or you have the JetBrains suite already through something else, I like the JetBrains suite. I'm just super used to the key bindings, and the ability to move around quickly for me is very important. So we're going to open our new project. So we're going to go to C code server. Now, I like to just directly open the resources directory so that I don't have all of this clutter. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So yeah, now we have our resources directory, and we have players in there and our meta.xml. Oops, I created that file with a whole bunch of junk in there. We'll just get rid of that. And we are just going to create a basic XML file. If you've never dealt with XML before, it's very similar to how you would write HTML. You have, opening and closing tags like these guys, and you will, inside of that, create basically a line item for each file that is inside this folder, and you're going to tell the server how to read that file. So what we're going to do is we're going to go script, and then we're going to tell it where that file is. It's going to be at players.lua, and it is going to be type server. So this piece is very important. What this does is tells our server whether or not it will be running this file itself, or if it will be sending it to the client to run it. So we'll get a little bit more into that later as to what the difference between that is. Right now, we're just going to work with server files. So this is our players.lua server file. Let's go ahead and create that in our players directory. Players. And what we're going to do here is we're going to create a basic structure for just spawning a player into the world. So how we're going to do that is we're going to create an event for when a player joins. We're going to spawn them into the world. So when a player joins, run some code. The code that we want to run is we want to spawn the player. Once we've spawned the player in the location that we want them to be, we're going to fade their camera in. So basically, when you first join an MTA server, your camera is completely black. You see nothing, and it's up to the scripter to put that camera where we want to put it and make sure that it actually is turned on. So fading the camera in is basically turning on that camera, and putting the camera where we want, we're going to set the camera to follow where we spawned the player. So we're going to set the camera target to be the spawned player. Cool. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So we want to run this code when a player joins. So how you do that is by creating an event handler. So Multi-Theft Auto will dispatch events on a whole wide variety of things that we'll dive into a little bit more later. But for now, we will create a handler for when a player joins. So on player join. Now, when you're binding an event handler, you need to bind it to something. For now, what we're going to do is just bind it to the root element. The root element is the server itself, basically, and everything else is a child of root. So when a player joins, they will join as a child of our root element. The element tree, again, we'll dive into a little bit more later, but for now, we'll just use root. So this here is a closure. If you've worked in JavaScript or similar languages like that, you may have seen this before. Basically, this code is going to run only when this event is fired and our handler picks it up. So what we're going to do in here is we are going to execute what we wanted to do with these 3 comments here. So the first thing is we want to spawn the player. So let's just do spawn player. Now, the first argument to spawn player is the player that we want to spawn. Now, because we're binding to an event of onPlayerJoin, what MTA is going to do for us is it's going to give us this source variable. The source variable is the source of the event, which in this case is going to be the player that we're spawning. So let's do source, and then the following arguments are the X, Y, and Z coordinates inside of the world where we want to spawn them. So let's just spawn them directly in the middle of the map for now. We'll spawn them at 0, 0, and then we'll spawn them 5 feet in the air just to make sure that they don't fall through the world. And then let's fade their camera in. So this one's pretty straightforward. We're going to do fade camera and then the source player, and we're going to fade in, which is true. And now we need to set the camera target. So set camera target source. So let's run our server now and see if this is going to work. So one thing that we haven't done yet is told the server that this player's resource exists. So in your server mods deathmatch directory, you're going to have an MTA server configuration file. In this configuration file, if we open this up, there's a whole bunch of settings here, but what we're concerned with right now is scrolling to the bottom, and there's a bunch of resources here. So what we want to do is just delete all of the other ones because we've deleted all those resources. And we're going to say that we want our player's resource to start up with the server. So this tells it when the server starts up, just start our resources. And we don't need this resource to be protected. We won't worry about that for now. Actually, we can just get rid of that guy. So let's go back out here and let's try and start our server. Cool. Looks like it started up rather quickly. And let's jump over to MTA and we will connect to our local. And look at that, it spawned us. So our code has worked. It has spawned us in the middle of the map. This is roughly 0, 0. So now we can move on to more fun things now that we are spawned into the world. The first thing that I recommend anyone do when they're creating their first resource for MTA is to create a vehicle system. A vehicle system is so all-encompassing that you get to try out a little bit of everything, and you can really spend months and months on a vehicle system if you wanted to, but it's a great way to get a foundational understanding of how multi-theft auto works, how you can interact with it, how the element tree works. So that's what we're going to dive into today. Now, the best resource when learning multi-theft auto is the Wiki. The Wiki has everything that you need to know about what all of the different events are that are available to you, what all of the different commands are that you can make use of. Everything that you need is right here at your fingertips. So what we're going to do here is jump down to the vehicle function section, and we're going to click on create vehicle. So this is how you create a vehicle in multi-theft auto. You give it a model, where you want it to spawn. Let's see, we got some rotation, the license plate, the direction. I'm not really sure what that's useful for, and then the variant for something like a Mesa, which has a removable top. So let's go ahead and jump back into our code. I'm going to hop into VS Code over here, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder under our resources directory, and what we're going to do is we're going to call that vehicles. In our vehicles directory, again, we're going to create a meta.xml file. And in here, we're going to do the same thing we did before, where we create a vehicles.lua, tell the server that it is a server file, and save that guy. And then in here, we're going to create vehicles.lua, and let's create a vehicle. Now, in Lua, we can just write create vehicle right here, and it will do that. I think 400 is a land stalker, so let's create a land stalker at 005, same spot that we spawned ourselves, and let's just leave it at that. Anytime you see in the documentation these little square brackets, that means that these arguments are all optional, so you don't have to fill them in if you don't want to. And so for this, we're just not going to. So let's just save that and see what happens. Let's jump over to our server, and we can type refresh. Now what refresh does is it just rescans that directory and finds any resources that have been added or removed, and then we can start that resource by just doing start vehicles. So our vehicles resource is started, and would you look at that? We have a brand new car that we can drive around, and awesome. So this vehicle was created inside of our vehicles resource, so it created a vehicle element in our server. So this vehicle is an element in the element tree, and it exists as a child of our vehicles resource, which exists as a child of root. So that's how our element tree kind of breaks down. So if we go ahead and stop this vehicles resource, stop vehicles, then you'll notice that vehicle disappears because we have deleted the node in the tree that is the vehicles resource, and that in turn deletes all children. So this resource itself, not super useful yet because it just spawns one vehicle and it only lives for when the resource is running, and it doesn't really, we can't do anything with this. We just have one land stalker. So what we want to do instead is make it so that you can create your own vehicle inside the server. So how we might do something like that is by creating what's called a command. So similar to how you have add event handler in Multi-Theft Auto, you also have add command handler. So a command handler allows you to do something like, we want to create vehicle, create a command that says create vehicle, and when that command is called, we want to run this closure, and it also has a couple arguments afterwards, which is, are you required to be, logged in and granted permission to this to run it? For now, we'll say no. And is it case sensitive, which we'll also say no. If someone wants to type a capital C, we'll allow them to still create a vehicle. So in this closure, we want to take a couple arguments. So whenever you have a command, the first two arguments are always the player who executed the command and the command itself that was typed. So the command is literally going to be the string create vehicle. This is useful because this closure can be defined in a couple different ways. It can be defined inline, like I've done here as a closure, or it can be defined as a function. So we could say create vehicle for player and paste our code up here, and then we can go create vehicle for player, and now we have it living outside. So then we could do something like create vehicle, create v, I don't know, make v. There's way too many different ways that you could say this, but if you want to make it so that it's as easy as possible for people to create them, you can create command handlers to your heart's content, and then you can check which one was actually used by looking at this command string. And anything after the first two arguments are going to be things that the player has actually typed in. So in this case, we want them to type in the model of vehicle that they want to create. and then we're just going to take this guy and put it in here. And we're just going to paste this model instead of 400 to allow them to create any vehicle that they want. So let's go ahead and give this a try. Now, if we come back to our server, the vehicles resource isn't running. So we need to come to our server first and do start vehicles. And you'll notice that now we have no vehicle just spawning automatically. But if we do create vehicle 400, alas, our vehicle spawns. And now, because we've done it this way, we can hopefully create more than one. So let's get this guy out of the way and create vehicle 401. Ooh, a Bravura. Awesome. So we're getting there, but we don't want our vehicle to always spawn directly in the middle of San Andreas and then have to go and pick it up there. What we want it to do is we want it to spawn near the player. So what we're going to do here is we are going to get the position of the player. So we're going to get the X, Y, and Z coordinate of the player by doing get element position player. Now, what we've done here is we've created 3 variables. So if we come over to the wiki and we search for get element position, you will see that it returns 3 floats indicating the position of the element, X, Y, and Z. So float, float, float. So we are capturing those by creating 3 local variables, X, Y, and Z. We put local here because we only want these variables to exist inside of this function. We don't want them to be available somewhere else and potentially causing issues where we're trying to read an X, Y, and Z somewhere else and we're getting it from this command. So always use local until you have a reason. Otherwise, there's very few reasons why you want something that isn't local. The way to specify a global argument is just by leaving out local. Now those are global, and you can see here that my JetBrains IDE is getting upset because it doesn't like when you use global. So let's do that, and we're just going to paste in X, Y, Z. Now, if we do it exactly at the player's position, it's going to spawn on top of the player and crush them. So what we're going to do is we're just going to make it spawn a little bit to the north of them. Let's say 5 north of them. So let's go and jump over to our code and jump over to our server and restart the vehicles resource. Now that we've done that, we are going to create V400, and it spawned directly in front of me. And let's just try that again. We'll run a little bit further away. We'll face north so that we can see it and create V402, a buffalo. Nice. So this is coming along. Now we have a vehicle. We can create vehicles and we can drive them around. But the problem is when we restart the resource, all of the vehicles are deleted and can never be recovered. Now, that can work for some game modes, but particularly what I've always worked on is roleplay projects, and if your vehicle gets deleted every time the server restarts, that's probably not ideal. So the next step we're going to take is adding a database into this mix and saving our vehicle so that when we restart the vehicles resource or the server, that vehicle comes back.